This is something that happened when I was a kid, and for a long time I didn't tell anyone about it. Not because I didn't want to or it didn't matter, I just felt like I couldn't explain it without sounding a little crazy. I still don't exactly like explaining it because it brings back memories, but here's my story. When I was growing up, my parents would go on date nights about once a month, and when they did, they would drop my sister and me off at my grandparents' house. Their place was a little ways outside of town, so it was quieter and darker than where we lived. We would stay the night there, then get picked up in the morning, and my grandparents were always great about doing things with us and overfeeding us. It was a routine that happened for years, and we loved it because we were very close to our grandparents. Then I hit 12 or 13 years old, and something started happening to me only when I stayed at their house. The first time I didn't even know what it was, and it legitimately scared me more than anything I had ever experienced up to that point. I didn't know it at the time, but it turns out I was having sleep paralysis. The way it went was I would be lying in bed in their spare bedroom where I always stayed and right on the edge of falling asleep. This was just a plain room with nothing more than a framed world map on the wall, so there wasn't much to look at. Somewhere in the sleep process, I would wake up, or at least I thought I did, and my eyes would be wide open. I could see the room and the doorway, and I could even look over at the map on the wall. I knew exactly where I was and could think as clearly as if I were wide awake, but I couldn't move. My arms and legs felt locked down to the bed, and I couldn't turn my head or even make a sound. I remember trying to yell, but was so far from being able to that I stopped wasting my time. It was incredibly claustrophobic, like being trapped inside my own body with no way out. Then I would see the silhouettes of two figures coming into the room, and when this first started, they were just dark outlines with no detail. I only knew there were two of them walking in through the doorway. They moved normally like anyone else would walk into a room, which somehow made it worse. Then they would walk up to the bed and get extremely close to me, and this was way too close where they were leaning in and inspecting me. It gave me a deep, angry feeling like they were in my personal space. I never felt anyone actually touch me, but it was violating because I couldn't stop it. Eventually, I would watch them walk away and out of the room. Then I would break through the paralysis and my body could move again. There were a few times where I jumped off the bed and looked around the first floor, but it was always empty other than my sister on the daybed in my grandma's sewing room. Over the next year, it would happen every time we stayed with them, but nowhere else. I never experienced this outside of their house. It also followed the same pattern every time and in order, where I would wake up paralyzed, see the two figures walk over to me, then wake up. Nothing changed other than me starting to expect it, which actually made it scarier. As it continued, these sleep paralysis episodes lasted longer and were more drawn out, which was really hard on me since I was keeping it all a secret. There was one night in particular that stood out though, and until then I had only ever seen dark outlines coming into the room. That time had a lot more detail for some reason, and I could see their faces well enough to know they were not silhouettes of people. When they came close to the bed, what I saw was horribly alien to me, and I mean that in a way where I'd never seen anything like them. Their features resembled a human face, but at the same time had very disturbing and unsettling differences. Like their eyes had these deep lines under them and they were too far apart, and their noses were almost non-existent. Looking at them in detail gave me a physically sick feeling, and it left me with some real PTSD. It was easily the scariest thing I can remember because of how real it felt and how close they were to my face. Right around my 14th birthday, this all stopped. Part of the reason could be because I was staying home alone more at that age and I didn't go to my grandparents' house as much, but I did stay with them occasionally and I never had it happen again. I always felt like my birthday had something to do with it. I kept all of this to myself forever, but it never stopped bothering me. I did find a book from the library about sleep paralysis during high school, and a lot of what I read was very similar to what happened to me. Not being able to wake up and seeing dark figures in the room was such a common theme. I even read a story about a guy who would see a dark figure float into his room and hover over him horizontally just inches away from his face, and that sounded horrific. But my experiences were a little different, and I never really found anyone else who got a close-up, detailed view of the figures like I did. I mostly pushed all of this down, kept my mouth closed, and tried not to think about it, but years later, something brought it back in a way that I could never have guessed. I was bowling after work with my dad and my Uncle Jeff and a few of their friends. We had pitchers of beer going around, and I ended up having a long, semi-drunk conversation with my uncle, who I've always been pretty close to. I don't remember how we got on the subject, but he said something about never staying at his parents' house again, which is my grandparents' house. When I asked him why, he jumped into this rant about their house being haunted or having evil spirits in it, and he was being totally serious. Jeff is a cigarette-smoking, beer-drinking, bar-fighting guy. I had never heard anything like that come out of his mouth before, and I had definitely never seen him be afraid of anything. He told me that when he was still living there back when he was a teenager, he would wake up pinned down to his bed and saw black demons come into his room. When I heard him say that, I just about dropped my beer on the floor. It turns out he had been tortured by an eerily similar sleep paralysis for years in that same house, and it was enough to make him move out at 17. In his words, there was something wrong with that place. I ended up telling him everything that happened to me, and we realized that both of us had gone through almost the exact same thing, even though it happened to him a couple of decades before it happened to me. He had never gotten any close-up view or detailed faces like I did, and he was calling them ghosts and demons, but that's not what I saw. To me, they looked like actual aliens or disfigured human beings, and when I told him that, I think I unlocked a whole new fear in his own experience. That night at the bowling alley confirmed to me that it wasn't just something in my head. It also made me dismiss the sleep paralysis theory because it seems impossible that two separate people could have virtually the same paralysis and visions in the same place 20 years apart. Jeff and I believe that whatever happened to us was very real because of how perfectly it lines up, and we think we were possibly being visited or studied by something. We're not sure about the reason it happened to both of us, though. That could be the house itself or the location of it, or maybe even our blood relationship. It's given us a pretty deep connection now that goes far beyond an uncle and a nephew. It's really weird too, because this is never something that we try to joke about or make light of, which would be way more normal for both of us. We always tend to do that. It's much more of a serious shared trauma, and as horrible as it was, I'm actually glad we have each other to lean on. This is the first time I've ever written my story down, and probably the first time I've told anyone outside of my family. I had a pretty crazy sighting when I was younger that I still believe could have only been one of two things: a military test gone wrong or an actual alien craft hovering right over our neighborhood. It was the very end of summer vacation right before I started 8th grade, and two of my friends and I had planned to sneak out of our houses to meet up at midnight. The whole idea was we were going to try to see these girls that lived on the next block who we knew were having a birthday party sleepover. We went to school with all of them, and my friend had a crush on one of the girls, so we were hoping they'd be awake and see us walking by. When the time came, we made it out of our houses without getting caught and started heading to the end of our block. Then at the corner, we turned right to cut over, and the second we came around the corner house, all three of us saw something at the same time. There was an enormous black thing in the sky shaped exactly like a long blimp. The first thing I thought of was the Hindenburg, most likely because I'd seen the famous pictures of it, but this seemed even bigger. It wasn't even far away, probably 5 or 6 blocks from where we were standing, so it felt like it was right on top of us. My friends ran out into the middle of the street to get a view without the trees blocking it, and I followed right behind them. It's really hard for me to explain just how huge this thing was. In my opinion, it was easily the length of a football field, and possibly even longer. That is not an exaggeration. I think I was most surprised by how completely silent it was in the neighborhood. We couldn't hear so much as a light hum, so it couldn't have had an engine on it. Not one that was running anyway. It was just floating in the air perfectly still, and the three of us kept asking each other if we could see it, like we needed confirmation that it was actually there. Because it was dark out, it was hard to tell if it had any color to it, but to me it looked like a black polished gunmetal, sort of a mix of dark gray and black. There were no lights on it anywhere and no windows or markings that might give us a clue about what it was or where it came from, and it also wasn't moving. Then something happened that I still struggle to comprehend. It started to change. The best way I can put this is that it looked like it was deflating or collapsing in on itself. I say deflating because of how much it resembled a blimp, but that's not exactly the right word for what it looked like. All I know is that it rapidly got smaller. When it shrunk down like this, we thought it was going to shrink into nothing, but when it got to roughly 10% of its original size, there was something left behind that was this small glowing white object that was shaped exactly like a barbell. It had two brighter ball ends that were connected by a long thin line, and the whole thing was bright. Then that object started to slowly fall toward the ground with wispy trails of smoke that we could see trailing above it as it dropped. We just so happened to be in front of a neighbor's house that we all knew, and his front yard had a pretty tall uphill slope. We ran onto his lawn and up to the side of his house to get a slightly better vantage point because we wanted to see where the glowing barbell was going to land. By sheer chance, literally seconds after we'd gotten out of the road, two brand new black trucks came tearing down our street. They looked like F-150s and both had big diamond plate toolboxes mounted on the back, just like what you'd see on work trucks. They were going way too fast for a neighborhood and had to be doing 70 miles an hour, which was insane for the street we lived on. We ran back down after they passed us and watched them go 3 more blocks before making a hard, screeching right turn in the direction where I would guess the glowing object had fallen. It seemed like they knew exactly where they were going and what they were doing, and it really made the whole situation feel real. It wasn't just something in the sky anymore. There were people on the ground who knew what was going on and they were urgently reacting to it. After the trucks went around the corner, our attitudes changed. Everything felt serious all of a sudden, and we didn't think we should be wandering around anymore. The entire scene had a law enforcement or military feeling to it, and we quickly came to the same conclusion at the same time. We needed to get home. Before we split up, I promised the other guys I would tell my dad first thing in the morning. He worked for the city, and for some reason I thought he would know exactly what we saw. That makes no sense now, but I felt like he would know what had happened. The next day I did just that, and I told him everything, including the sneaking out part, since it didn't seem like a big deal compared to the story I had. I expected a huge reaction out of him and some kind of explanation, but instead he didn't seem impressed and told me he didn't know what we could have seen. I'm pretty sure he thought I was making it up to cover sneaking out or blowing something normal way out of proportion. He only ever opened up to this being real when I got older, and now he knows I wasn't making it up. Every time I think about this, I'm convinced that we couldn't have been the only ones who saw it. There is just no way. I know it was late at night, but it wasn't that late. There had to be other people out and about. Also, the idea of it being connected to the military has always scared me more than it being an actual alien ship. I don't know why that is exactly, but when I think of our own government flying something that massive over populated areas without it being the headline on every news outlet the next day, it doesn't even seem possible. I never heard another word about it anywhere, ever. Over the years, I've only gotten one possible explanation, and it was from someone in my family who knows the story. They did a little research on their own and found something called a stealth blimp reconnaissance platform. From what I understand, these are high-altitude blimps used by our military for surveillance and other operations, so I guess it's possible we saw something like that being tested or even crashing. That almost makes sense, at least for the first part, but it doesn't really account for the glowing barbell object we saw afterward, unless maybe it burned up or collapsed in just the right way and that was all that was left of it. But there never were any flames or fire, it was just glowing bright white. I know there are so many questionable and made-up sightings out there, but I can assure you this one is real. It actually happened, and it's something I've never been able to explain no matter how much time goes by. I have seen two very strange and incredible things in my life that are separated by almost 50 years. The first happened when I was just 7 years old and living in Oromocto, New Brunswick in Canada in the year 1963. I was playing baseball outside of our house with 5 other friends that lived around us. This was something we did a lot in our neighborhood, and we would usually play in the afternoon, so I'm guessing it was somewhere around 3 o'clock and in July. While I was standing in the field, I just happened to be looking up at this low ceiling of darker clouds that had come in, and I noticed a black object just barely starting to drop out of the clouds. When I saw it, I completely stopped paying attention to the game and watched it continue to come down until I could see the whole thing underneath the bottom of the clouds. I had no idea what it was, but from the ground it looked like a black, upright, rectangular box. I couldn't have told you the size of it when I was that young, but looking back, I would guess it was somewhere in the 50-foot range from top to bottom and about a third of that in width. Since I was the first one to see it, I yelled to everyone else and the game came to a stop. I remember our whole group coming together and watching it drop lower and lower until I thought it was going to land in the park, and this scared me so much that I dropped my glove on the ground and ran home, which was only a few houses away from where we were playing. When I got in the house, my dad was sitting in the living room and I was yelling for him to come to the park and see what was happening, and I told him everyone was still watching it. I don't know exactly what he said to me, but I know it was something about a satellite that was expected to be seen that day, and he told me that's all that it was. It's such a weird thing for him to say, and he was likely trying to get me back outside so I wasn't bothering him, but that's exactly how I remember it. After that, I ran back to the park to tell everyone it was fine and that it was just a satellite. This part is very clear in my mind because as I ran through the park gate and was getting close to my friends, I saw that every one of them was lying on the ground in this one small area. They were on their backs and looking up at the satellite, which was still there and even closer, and I was the only person standing when I got to them. I felt really excited and proud that I knew what it was, and as soon as I got to them, I said it was just a satellite, but only one of them said anything back to me, which was, "I don't think so." He was one of the older kids and the only person to reply at all. No one else said a word. They all just laid there staring up at the sky. The object was now hovering in one spot at treetop height, and we couldn't have had a clearer view of it. Anyone else in the park would have been able to see it. The entire thing looked like a giant metal locker, and I definitely remember seeing some kind of markings on it. I don't know if this was actual text or words, but I know I saw something down the sides. It had no lights, granted it was still full daylight, and I didn't hear a sound. It wasn't turning or spinning in the air either, and I'm positive there were no flames or exhaust coming from the bottom. The only other details about this object I got while walking around the field trying to see the other 4 sides, and everyone else I was with stayed on the ground. When I got to one of the other sides, I could see something like a concave door or an opening. Then weirdly, in the center of this concave section, I could swear there was a white arrow pointing upward. I know this sounds very strange and these memories were from when I was very young, but it's exactly what I saw. I kept walking around the field to see the entire thing while still yelling to my friends, but I never heard anyone say anything. Then after a pretty short amount of time, it just started going back up like an elevator and gaining altitude again. I stood there and watched it just like everyone else was doing, and eventually it got back up to the clouds and went into them. I think it was easy for me to accept what was happening because of what my dad had said. In my mind, it was a satellite, so I had the same amount of excitement as I would seeing a plane land or anything normal like that. I also had no idea what a satellite looked like because I was young and it was the early 60s. After it had gone back into the clouds, my friends started getting up off the ground and grabbing their baseball gear. They still weren't saying anything, they just picked their stuff up and walked back to their houses. Only one of them ever even mentioned it happening, and it was the next day when we were playing catch in my yard. He basically said it was pretty crazy that we had seen that in the park, and that was it. Other than that one time, nobody in our neighborhood ever talked about it again. The next time I saw something was almost 50 years later, and again in July for some reason. This was in 2012 at 5:30 in the morning, and I was living in Barrie, Ontario. I had just woken up to take my dog Oscar out for his morning walk. This happened to be a partly cloudy morning, and while Oscar was doing his business, I was just kind of waking up and looking at the sky when I noticed another small black rectangular box floating upright directly under the layer of clouds. I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was definitely visible, but I saw it go past an area of clear sky and it was unmistakable. Even though it was probably 1,000 or more feet in the air, I could easily see it, and it looked identical to the one I'd seen when I was young. The contrast of the black box against the light sky actually stood out just like a white commercial jet does against blue sky. I wanted to call out to anyone around me to look, but the neighborhood trail I was walking on was empty that early in the morning. I had nothing on me to get a picture or a video of it, and I hadn't even gotten dressed for work yet, so all I could do was stand next to Oscar and stare at it. This time it didn't come down or really do anything other than traverse underneath a few of the clouds, but it did lift back up into them shortly after I spotted it, which was exactly like the first time. It was an amazing thing to see, and it brought back all the memories from my childhood and being in the park. I'm going to admit something that might make me sound stupid, but from my first sighting at age 7 all the way until I was 23 years old, I believed what my dad had told me and somehow got it into my head that satellites could just effortlessly float through the air anywhere they wanted to go. Don't judge me on that because I had a lot of other interests when I was young, so satellites and space and even airplanes were never something I thought or cared about. I eventually learned that's not how satellites work, of course, but it really wasn't until 1979, which was the year NASA's Skylab lost its orbit and people were afraid of it falling back to Earth. Every news outlet was talking about how this 77-ton space station could crash into a major city, and I remember talking to friends about it while it was going on. Getting back to my story, I really don't know what the heck I saw in 1963 and again in 2012. I got a much closer view of it when I was a kid, but strongly believe it was the same object. I wish I would have been older the first time, or I at least wish my dad would have actually walked outside to look at it because we were all so young that I might be mixing things up a little. At a bare minimum, I know that whatever was over the park that day physically and mentally affected my friends, and maybe it missed me because of my brief run to the house. That's always been such a confusing detail. I definitely keep my eyes open now though, so who knows, maybe I'll get one more chance to see it before my time is up. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies